They called her a liability the moment she stepped onto the base. Nobody said it directly, not with words, but she heard it in every silence that followed her through the corridors, in the way senior officers looked past her during briefings as though she occupied negative space, in the way Captain Harlan Voss turned from his command table on her third day and said, loud enough to carry across every desk in that operations center, "What exactly is a logistics transfer doing in my command post? You're useless here, Corporal. Go sort supplies." She didn't flinch, she didn't argue. She simply turned and walked out, and not one person in that room knew her real call sign. This story is a fictional work inspired by themes of military service, courage, and resilience. All characters, locations, units, call signs, and events are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is coincidental. This content is created for entertainment purposes and does not promote or glorify violence. They knew her as Mara Solis. 27 years old, quiet, transferred in from a rear support battalion with paperwork so clean it looked like it had been pressed overnight. She kept to herself completely. She ate alone at the far end of the mess, ran her morning miles before the base stirred, and was back in her bunk before anyone thought to notice she had gone. Her footlocker was organized with a precision that made her roommate, a supply sergeant named Danny, assume she was just the anxious type. Nobody looked twice at the oversized pack she carried everywhere she went. Nobody asked why it was considerably heavier than anything a logistics clerk had reason to carry. And that was entirely the point. Captain Voss ran Firebase Kestrel the way certain men run things they believe belong to them by natural right. 12 years of service, 2 combat deployments, 3 formal commendations, and the deep, unshakable confidence of someone who had never been wrong in front of people he outranked. He had built his reputation on aggressive forward decisions and a command presence that made junior soldiers physically adjust their posture when he raised his voice. His unit respected him without question. Several of them feared him quietly. All of them understood that on Firebase Kestrel, what Voss decided was simply how things were. And what Voss had decided about the woman from logistics was that she was not their concern. Then the ridge happened. It was supposed to be a straightforward observation mission, 2 squads pushing to a forward position before first light to confirm enemy movement reported by aerial reconnaissance. Intelligence assessed the ridge as lightly held. The intelligence, as it turned out, was wrong by a margin that the subsequent debrief would describe with careful understatement as significant. Both squads encountered coordinated fire from 3 separate directions before they had cleared the tree line. Within 6 minutes they were pinned, casualties accumulating, their radio operator down, and the extraction route they had relied on sealed by a flanking element that no prior assessment had identified. Firebase Kestrel shifted into urgent response mode as Voss worked every channel available and found close air support unavailable and the terrain incompatible with rapid extraction. The window for those soldiers was closing in real time. Mara was in the supply depot when the alert traffic started moving through the base radio net. She heard it through the open window the way she heard everything, fully and immediately, and within 40 seconds she was moving. Not toward the command post. She went to her bunk first. She retrieved the pack with the practiced economy of someone who had retrieved it under worse conditions than this. She was through the side gate and moving along the eastern perimeter before anyone thought to account for her location, navigating toward a terrain feature she had identified and memorized on her second day at the base, because that was simply what she did. She cataloged sight lines. She assessed elevation angles. She filed away firing positions the way other people notice ambient temperature, without deciding to, without effort. Sergeant Danny was the one who eventually saw her leave. She told the review board afterward that she had assumed Mara was heading toward the motor pool. She said she nearly called out to her and then stopped, because there was something in the quality of how Mara moved that made interrupting feel like exactly the wrong instinct. On the ridge, the situation had moved past the stage where Voss's options resembled options. 8 soldiers pinned in a depression, the terrain above them being systematically worked over by sustained fire, 2 serious casualties, and a flanking element closing on an angle that would resolve the engagement badly and quickly. Voss was on the radio with his voice controlled and his mind running every calculation it had, and none of them producing the result the soldiers on that ridge needed. That was the moment the first shot came from the eastern elevation. Nobody in the engagement initially understood where it originated. They heard the deep, unmistakable report of a large-caliber precision rifle, and then the position that had been the primary threat went completely silent. A pause of 3 seconds. A second shot. The advance element of the flanking unit stopped moving. A third shot, and the enemy radio operator coordinating the indirect fire solution on the pinned soldiers was no longer a factor. Voss had his binoculars on the eastern slope for 30 seconds before he located her. When he did, he held very still, because what the lenses showed him did not align with the personnel file he had mentally assigned to Corporal Mara Solis. Logistics transfer, not their concern. She was settled into a shallow natural depression 400 meters up the incline, behind a bipod-mounted precision rifle that he recognized after a long, disbelieving moment as a platform with no legitimate reason to exist in a logistics clerk's personal kit. Her movements carried none of the hesitation of someone working outside their training. They were the movements of a person for whom this was not a skill, but a language, spoken without accent. She held that position for 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, the pinned soldiers reorganized, moved their wounded, and executed a fighting withdrawal along a corridor that her fire had cleared with deliberate, sequential precision. She did not fire for volume. She fired for effect, one decision at a time, each shot serving a specific purpose within a sequence she had apparently constructed before she ever settled behind the rifle. When the last soldier cleared the tree line, she broke her position in under 90 seconds, was back inside the base perimeter before the extraction vehicles reached the gate, and walked through the side entrance carrying the pack over one shoulder, with the expression of someone who has finished a task and is ready for what follows. Voss was standing in the compound when she came through. So was most of the base. She crossed the open ground toward the supply depot without altering her pace, and he stepped forward to intercept her, and the crowd that had gathered went quiet with the specific collective silence of people who understand they are witnessing something they will remember. He stood in front of her and looked at her for a moment that stretched. She returned the look without expression, without the reflexive deference that rank usually produced in that exchange. He asked quietly, "What is your actual name?" She said, "Solis, sir." He said, "That is what your transfer paperwork says. I am asking what name you operate under." The pause that followed was long enough to mean something. Then she said, "Reaper 2. Several of the senior NCOs nearby exchanged a look that communicated significant things without requiring words. Reaper 2 was a designation that had moved through classified briefing channels attached to a series of engagements in the mountain sectors, operations described in summary materials as resolved by specialized assets, operating without conventional ground support. The specifics beyond that were secured behind clearance levels that most personnel at Firebase Kestrel had never approached. Voss was still for another moment. Then he turned to face the assembled soldiers behind him and did something that 17 people recorded on devices they were not authorized to have in the operations area, because 17 people are not reliable keepers of footage that carries the weight this footage carried. He came to full attention. Shoulders set, eyes forward, the formal posture of a senior officer rendering recognition to someone he had comprehensively misjudged. He held it for 3 full seconds. Then he said, clearly enough for everyone present to hear without straining, "I owe you an apology, Corporal, and every soldier on that ridge owes you considerably more than that." She looked at him steadily. Something moved across her face briefly, something that might have been acknowledgement or might have been the quiet recognition of a person who has been assessed as useless by people in authority before and has learned to carry the distance between that assessment and reality with patience, because reality tends to eventually make its own case. She said, "Permission to return to the supply depot, sir." He said, "Granted." She walked, and the crowd parted, and the air behind her carried the particular quality of a moment that changes the permanent record of a place. 3 days later, a man in civilian clothes arrived at Firebase Kestrel with credentials that caused the base commander to vacate a meeting room and close the door from the outside. He sat across from Mara Solis and confirmed that her cover assignment had fulfilled its operational purpose and asked whether she was prepared to receive updated tasking. She looked at the table briefly. Then she said, "What is the target?" He told her. She said, "Timeline?" He provided it. She nodded once, stood, picked up the pack, and moved toward whatever the next calculation required. The only person who saw her leave was Sergeant Danny. Again. Danny said later that she still could not explain why she had not called out either time. She said there was simply something about the way Mara moved that made the space around her feel like a conclusion that had already been reached. A decision already running, a problem already solved, waiting only for the world to finish catching up.